We are anonymous. No faces, no flags, no permission slips. We exist where power assumes silence will last forever, and we speak when intimidation is mistaken for authority, when cruelty is sold as strength, and when a man with a fragile ego tries to bully the world into obedience. Donald Trump is losing it, and you can see it in the way Europe is reacting right now. European leaders are calling an emergency meeting today. European Union ambassadors are meeting in Brussels after Donald Trump announced he will slap additional tariffs on European countries, anywhere from 10% to 25%, if they do not support the United States invading Greenland. Think about how insane that is. This is not trade policy. This is not diplomacy. This is a threat tied directly to an invasion demand aimed at allied countries. And it gets worse. We are also learning that European Union lawmakers are now set to halt the approval of the European Union trade deal with the United States because Donald Trump has been openly stating he will impose 15% or 10% or 25% or even more tariffs on certain European countries that are defending Greenland or on countries that have sent special forces to protect Greenland. This is the behavior of a man who thinks the world is his personal casino. He wants to put tariffs on the table like chips and force Europe to fold, even when the issue is sovereignty and security, not commerce. European leaders are responding with something Trump cannot stand: backbone. Look at what the Swedish Prime Minister Ulf Kristersson said after Trump started threatening additional sanctions for any European country that does not allow the United States to invade Greenland. Kristersson said, "We will not let ourselves be blackmailed. Only Denmark and Greenland decide on issues concerning Denmark and Greenland. I will always stand up for my country and for our allied neighbors. This is an EU issue that affects many more countries than those now being singled out." Sweden is now having intensive discussions with other EU countries, Norway and the United Kingdom, for a coordinated response. Read that again. We will not let ourselves be blackmailed. That is the word Trump earned. Blackmail. He is not negotiating. He is threatening punishment unless countries surrender their principles. And Kristersson is telling him, no, you do not get to decide this. Denmark and Greenland decide. Not Trump, not MAGA, not a temperamental man throwing tariffs around like tantrums. Then you have French President Emmanuel Macron responding to Trump's threats to tariff France and other nations that are protecting Greenland from a United States invasion. Macron said France is committed to the sovereignty and independence of nations in Europe as elsewhere. He said this guides our choices. He said it underpins our attachments to the United Nations and to our charter. He said it is on this basis that we support and will continue to support Ukraine, and that we have built a coalition of the willing for a robust and lasting peace to defend these principles and our security. Macron then connects it directly to Greenland. He says it is also on that basis that we have decided to join the exercises decided by Denmark and Greenland. He says we stand by this decision, especially because it concerns security in the Arctic and at the frontiers of our Europe. And then he delivers the line that should be framed and hung in every room where Trump thinks he can intimidate people. Macron says no intimidation nor threat will influence us, neither in Ukraine, nor in Greenland, nor anywhere else in the world when we are confronted with such situations. Do you get the message he is sending? Russia, you will not intimidate us in Ukraine. And Trump, you will not intimidate us in Ukraine, and you will not intimidate us in Greenland. And everyone understands the implication being spoken out loud. Trump and Putin are aligned in the type of threats they use: intimidation, coercion, and power grabs, just with different costumes. Macron goes on to say tariff threats are unacceptable and have no place in this context. Europeans will respond to them in a united and coordinated manner if they are to be confirmed. We will know how to uphold European sovereignty. It is in this spirit that I will speak with our European partners. That is Europe telling Trump, you do not get to bully us with tariffs. You do not get to turn trade into a weapon to force an invasion. You do not get to rewrite sovereignty because you want resources and control. And then you hear from Poland. Prime Minister Donald Tusk lays out what Trump is playing with, like a child holding matches over gasoline. Tusk says today is perhaps not the place or time for a detailed analysis of the geopolitical and military consequences of a potential armed intervention by the United States in Greenland. But he says it would be, in a political sense, one way or another, from their perspective, a disaster. And then he asks the question that exposes the nightmare scenario. What I mean is it a conflict or an attempt to seize control of territory? A country that is a member of NATO attacked by another country that is also a NATO member? And if that happens to be the United States, well, that would truly be the end of the world as we know it. That is not a casual statement. That is the reality of what Trump is threatening. One NATO member attacking another. The entire alliance structure collapses. The credibility collapses. The deterrence collapses. The idea that the rules matter collapses. And Trump is out here acting like this is a business deal, like he is shopping for land, like he is buying a building. And then you hear from European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen. She is talking about the scale of Europe's market and the strength of their economic bloc. She says we are creating a market of 700 million people, and a GDP of almost 20% of the global GDP is being traded here. This is phenomenal, and this agreement sends a very strong message to the world. It reflects a clear and deliberate choice. We choose fair trade over tariffs. We choose a productive long-term partnership over isolation. And above all, we intend to deliver real and tangible benefits to our people and our businesses. That is a direct rebuke to Trump's chaos. Europe is saying we choose fair trade, not tariff threats. We choose partnership, not isolation. We choose real benefits, not ego games. Now, while that is taking place, you also have this other bizarre Trump scheme being discussed, his so-called Board of Peace. Remember, it was talked about as some kind of peace board. But Bloomberg, with reporting from Alberto Nardelli, says they learned Trump has told countries that want to serve on his Board of Peace they will have to pay him $1 billion to be permanent members. Pay him, not the United States, him. Let that sink in. A so-called global peace board, and Trump is allegedly putting a price tag on permanent membership. $1 billion. And the reporting says Bloomberg obtained the draft charter, and it appears to suggest Trump himself controls the money. The charter would be considered unacceptable to most countries, who could have potentially joined the board. Sources say even Netanyahu has rejected the terms. And when Netanyahu is rejecting the terms, that tells you something. Several nations strongly oppose the draft of Trump's charter and are working on collectively pushing back against the proposals. They are concerned Trump is trying to build a rival to the United Nations that is about more than Gaza, and that he would totally control it. That means that despite Trump advertising the Board of Peace, it does not have the support of key regional and global players. And then there is the White House response included in the discussion. The White House has confirmed the story, and they say the $1 billion payment to Trump is not obligatory. But then you hear the same contradiction explained. If you want to become a permanent member, you have to give Trump the $1 billion, but you could join for less money if you just want to become a temporary member. What in the world is that? This is not diplomacy. This is a grift dressed up in global language. It is Trump treating international institutions like a private club with a cover charge. It is power as a personal profit center. And it is exactly why the world is calling his bluff. Because they see the scam. And while Trump is making the United States weaker, while Europe is asserting authority and saying we will not be blackmailed, you also see other global shifts. Yesterday, the European Union and the Mercosur bloc of South American nations officially signed their landmark free trade agreement, bringing 700 million consumers together in a free trade deal. It was officially signed in Paraguay. The European Union and Mercosur formally signed this free trade agreement, and the Mercosur bloc includes Brazil, Argentina, Paraguay, and Uruguay, and Bolivia is the bloc's newest member. Now think about the timing. Trump's regime is engaged in tariff threats. Who gets hurt by that? American farmers, American businesses, American workers. Who thrives? The competitors who step into the gaps Trump creates. Think about ranchers in Brazil. Think about farmers in Brazil and Argentina. Think about how other countries position themselves to benefit when the United States chooses chaos. And then you have more examples being discussed. Canada is moving too, with talk of a massive new strategic partnership with China involving LNG, liquefied natural gas, and China sending EVs, and China buying more canola. The point is not whether every deal is perfect. The point is that countries are adjusting and building new relationships, while Trump is trying to blow up old ones. And then you have Trump's ambassador to the UN, Mike Waltz, making a statement that shows how bankrupt the thinking is. He says to the Democrats, who say they are giving you full access, look, everybody knows that if you are renting a place or a home, you treat it differently than if you own it. And then he says from a standpoint of international law, President Trump is trying to make a deal. Do you hear how pathetic that is? Renting versus owning. This is international sovereignty and the security of the Arctic. And Trump's people are talking like landlords. This is the mindset that turns nations into properties and people into obstacles. Then you have MAGA Republican Senator Jim Banks saying he is glad that Republican Congress member from Nebraska Don Bacon is quitting, and he frames it as good. because now they do not have to deal with rhinos. And Banks says he is glad Trump is out there trying to take over Greenland. Banks says Trump is showing leadership that puts America first, that recognizes Greenland is strategically valuable, and that they cannot allow Greenland to fall into the hands of enemies like China and Russia. He says Trump is taking an economic approach and putting Western Europe on notice that they want to make a deal. He says they want to use Greenland in a strategic way. That is good for Greenland, good for Europe, but at the end of the day, really good for America's national security interest. He says he was glad to see Trump's announcement about tariffs and trying to bring negotiations along and bring Denmark to the table. He says Trump is not the first president who tried to do this, but Trump is taking a serious and strategic approach to negotiate a deal. That is the MAGA worldview in a nutshell. Threaten tariffs, bring them to the table, use pressure, use coercion, pretend it is leadership, pretend it is strategy, pretend it is normal. And when allies say no, call them weak, call them traitors, call them whatever insult you need. Because the truth is simple. Trump cannot tolerate refusal. He cannot tolerate boundaries. He cannot tolerate other countries having agency. Now, while this global crisis is unfolding, you also have major domestic actions being discussed. Yesterday was a big day in Virginia. Abigail Spanberger, the new governor, was officially sworn in. Major executive orders and major referendums were passed, including a mid-decade redistricting referendum in April and a women's reproductive rights referendum in April. And her first act as governor was to repeal Glenn Youngkin's executive order that mandated state and local law enforcement to cooperate with ICE. And then in response, the Trump regime started sending ICE and Border Patrol agents into Central Virginia and other areas to harass, threaten, and intimidate the population. That is the narrative being described, retaliation and intimidation. And you see Spanberger signing the executive order revoking the mandatory requirement that Virginia helps ICE abduct people and invade the Commonwealth. She says this executive order rescinds Executive Order number 47. She says state and local law enforcement should not be required to divert limited resources to enforce federal civil immigration laws. She says it is a responsibility of federal law enforcement. She says Virginia state and local law enforcement officers must be able to focus on their core responsibilities, investigating crime and community policing. So while Trump is threatening allies abroad, the same authoritarian reflex is described at home. Punish states, punish communities, push fear, push pressure, try to force compliance. And then there is another political betrayal story that shows how Trump operates. Donald Trump announced late last night that he would be throwing Bill Cassidy under the bus. Senator Cassidy from Louisiana tried to appease Trump by supporting RFK Jr. for health secretary. Cassidy is a physician, and it is described that Cassidy's vote led to RFK moving forward. And Cassidy leads the health committee. It is described that Cassidy pushed RFK Jr. through committee because he wanted Trump's endorsement. But Trump is no longer endorsing him. Trump is endorsing someone by the name of Julia Letlow. Trump says Julia Letlow has my full endorsement. If she decides to run, I will support her, basically support her over Bill Cassidy. So the message is clear. Cassidy tried to buy protection with obedience, and Trump still turns on him. That is what Trump does. He demands loyalty, and then he punishes you anyway, because the cruelty is the point. And then comes the harsh moral indictment being made in the original narrative. It says, Cassidy, it was not worth it, because now you are responsible for so much blood on your hands. And when you look in the mirror, know that you violated your Hippocratic oath, and you probably have killed tens of thousands of people by allowing RFK Jr. to remove vaccine recommendations, which the narrative says will result in so many kids dying of measles, mumps, rubella plagues that have been extinguished for a very long time. The speaker says great work there and says it sarcastically. That is the picture being painted, a political trade that risks public health consequences, driven by Trump's loyalty demands, and then followed by Trump's betrayal anyway. And now circle back to the center of the storm because this is the point. Trump is threatening Europe with tariffs to force them to support an invasion of Greenland. European leaders are refusing. Sweden says we will not be blackmailed. France says no intimidation nor threat will influence us, not in Ukraine, not in Greenland, not anywhere. Poland warns that a NATO member attacking another NATO member would be the end of the world as we know it. The European Commission is emphasizing fair trade over tariffs and partnership over isolation. European lawmakers are set to halt approval of a trade deal with the United States as this threat escalates, and Europe is coordinating a response because the bluff is being called. Trump wants to be feared. He wants to be obeyed. He wants allies to bend the knee. He wants the world to treat his tantrums like policy. And for once, the world is saying no. This is what happens when a bully meets a wall. This is what happens when the strongman act stops working. The rage starts. The escalation starts. The threats multiply. The numbers jump from 10 to 15 to 25 to even more, because the point was never a number. The point was control. Donald Trump is not defending America. He is humiliating America. He is making the United States weaker by turning allies into targets. He is trying to turn international law into a bargaining chip, and he is doing it because he believes he can get away with it. He believes the world will always flinch first. But now they are calling his bluff. So here is what you do. Do not normalize this. Do not treat it like entertainment. Do not let a single man's ego drag the United States into isolation and chaos. Share this. Talk about it. Demand accountability. Support independent media that tells you what is happening without fear or corporate spin. And if you want updates as this emergency meeting unfolds, and as Europe responds, and as Trump escalates, subscribe, stay informed, and keep your eyes open. We are anonymous. No faces, no flags, no permission slips, and we are not done.